Hi, I'm Josh. I'm one of the developers of the COVID-19 simulator, and today I'll be taking you through a few examples of how we might use the simulator to test different isolation policies within a classroom scenario. So I'm quickly just going to pull up a sketch of the scenarios we're going to be dealing with, and we're going to be considering a classroom of size 20, so it's 20 students inside our classroom, and we're going to be testing these students with LFDs on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And that's going to be an event that's already started, so there's no trigger needed to start these tests. And so the first policy we're going to consider is going to be called a fire break scenario. And so what that means is once one person in the group, the whole class, tests positive for COVID, the whole group would isolate. And so we see that using this close contact group idea by saying every student is in that group. So you can see that the students are highlighted in the blue and the close contact group is the orange box. So the next scenario we're going to consider is going to be table groups, and this is where the students are sat on different tables, and that's going to be defined as their close contact groups within the classroom. And as you can see here, we've partitioned our total population into 4 groups with 5 students in each. And so we're going to call this one table group to keep track of our different scenarios. And all that's going to be doing is reducing the amount of students within our subgroups within our calculator. And then finally at the bottom, you can see that we have every individual within our classroom in their own contact group. And in this scenario, the only way a student would be isolated is if they themselves test positive. So we're going to call this the test to release scenario. So we're going to have our 3 scenarios now, and we're going to see how we implement them inside our app. So back in the simulator, we're going to come over to our infection parameters tab and drop that down. And so what we're going to see at the top is the total number of agents, and if we bring back our sketchbook, we can see that was 20. So we're going to take that down to 20 students. Okay, and then the first policy we want to discuss is this fire break scenario. So that's going to be where everyone in our classroom is in the same contact group. And so for the rest of the parameters, that's all we really had to do to change this idea of different isolation policies within the classroom. But from here on in, we're going to just change a few things. We're going to use the current confirmed cases data from Wales, and that's going to increase the R and the background prevalence for our simulations. And these are going to be kept constant throughout each of our simulations we try. We just want to change the subgroup size. That's all we're testing here. And we're also going to include infections from the wider population. And that's all we have to do for the infection parameters. We also have to test on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and that's going to be using the LFDs. For that, the simulation parameters are already set for that, and we're not going to consider well-ventilated classrooms or agents using masks. So the last one we go down to is this mixing and testing Dropbox, and what we have to do is add in the extra testing on the Wednesday because the mixing day is already set for a classroom environment. We're only going to test this for 4 weeks, and we're not going to delay the testing depending on symptoms. Okay, so that's all our parameters set up, ready to go. And now all we have to do is name this. So this is the fire break scenario. So we're just going to run that. Okay, and that's going to be now taking 500 simulations using these parameters and collecting the summary results. Okay, so next we have to look at our next scenario. So that is the table group scenario. So this is the case where our subgroups are size 5. So we have 4 subgroups within our population, and each of those have 5 members in them. So all we have to do there is drop down our subgroup size to 5 and then rename our ID to be table group. And what we're going to do is run all of the simulations first and then compare the results once we're finished. And then finally we have our test to release scenario where every agent is within their own close contact group. So again, that's just changing this subgroup parameter down to 1. So we only have 1 person in each of our subgroups. We'll close that. And this is a test to release scenario, and we'll run that one as well. Okay, so that's all of our simulations run. So let's now just talk about the results a little. So what we can see on this right hand side is having the plot data, and we can choose to plot any of the results that we've just collected. So let's just go for the biggest disparity between the two, so that would be the fire break and the test to release. So what we can see when we have a fire break is that we're reducing the total number of infections, and you can see that in the top plot up here. The cumulative number of infections over the time is drastically reduced compared to this test to release idea. And that's because every time that we see an infection, so an agent is testing positive within our population, we're isolating the full class of students for 10 days. And that's more clear in this bottom plot. You can see these two peaks of almost full isolation from the class within the period of 28 days. And that's within the first 10 days, they found an agent in their class where they tested positive, and that whole class has isolated. And that's in comparison to this test to release policy, where we're only isolating the agents that are testing positive. And that's using LFDs, so that may have false negatives and false positives wrapped into those tests. So you're not absolute with your decisions on those isolations. But at this point, we should probably talk about that we make no statement of what outcome is best. We only make the tool to allow the policymakers to understand how different policies will influence infections within the school, and therefore it's up to them to decide which values of infections and absent days are acceptable. And on that note, what we'd like to do is show how these results can be extracted for further analysis. And so what we can do is press the Export Results button, and what that's going to do is take all the information that we can see in the plots and the summary table and place them into an Excel file. And so each of these files, each file is going to have a different sheet for each of the simulations run. Okay, I'm just going to pull that over there so we can see. And you can see that we have our fire break, our table group, and test to release simulations, each with the parameters we've given and the testing and mixing frequencies. So this can be used for further analysis.